All right, DJ LeRoy, we are back.
Yes, we are. Night Watchman. You know what? We are really, really kind of like babes in the woods when it comes to radio.
That is true, but it's not many people calling us babes these days.
That is true. That is absolutely true.
Yes.
But I'm excited about this particular show. This particular
I'm really excited. I'm very excited. I'm extremely excited. Absolutely.
Wow.
Because we have the legends of New York City radio coming on right now.
Well, I would then say you should do something that you normally don't do. Normally you save that for me. But you know what? You should bring them out.
All right. Well, who should we introduce first?
Chef Surprise. Let's see. What are you going to do?
Well, I think we should introduce because our first guest, quote unquote, retired from having to work, not from working. And that is the legendary Pat Prescott.
Yay!
Has had her last show with 94 The Wave, 94.6 The Wave, 94.7 The Wave in LA. But she is well known here in New York, starting, I mean, I don't know if it started out with WRVR, but that's where I remember. And then CD 101.9. And I think, were you the voice of Time Warner at one point in time? Time Warner Cable? She was all over. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing Pat Prescott's voice in New York. And
don't leave out WBLS.
That's right.
WBLS. And now still being heard on WBGO. And for a brief moment, she's going to be on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.
Yes. Very nice.
So welcome, Pat. Congratulations on your retirement, quote unquote. And we know that you still got a lot to do, and we're going to get to that. But first, we've got a couple of other honored guests that we're going to bring out as well.
Yes,
all right.
Here
we go.
So next, the legendary G. Keith Alexander.
Yeah, G. Keith.
Hello there. How are you? How you doing?
Good.
I guess legendary makes me old, right?
Well, legendary means old enough to tell stories about. So
I see.
Right. But because we're here, you get to tell your own story.
And he gets to tell it with that voice.
Oh, absolutely.
That's so kind of you, Pat.
Right.
I always say that if we don't tell our own stories, who else will?
Exactly.
And not the way we want to hear them.
Yes,
right.
Okay, so, all right, who we got now, Bob?
You know who we got. We saved the best for the last, and that is the legendary. I could say legendary again with Vy Higgensen. She's here. She's back. One of our favorite guests here on Soul Lounge Primetime. We love to have her, and to have her alongside her radio colleagues for so long a period of time. It is great to have all of you here on Soul Lounge Primetime.
As a matter of fact, Night Watchman, you know I'm actually putting her one sauce in my coffee. You know this.
We said to go in everything.
Yeah, everything.
That's what you said.
Available at Whole Foods on 125th Street.
Nice little shameless plug there.
Shameless. That's right. That's right.
I love it.
So you know what, everyone, we definitely want to hear the stories. We want to hear the journeys. And Pat, know that you are there in Chicago, Northwestern. Is that correct?
That is correct. I am I'm in Chicago right now. Just got here for my college reunion.
Oh, beautiful.
That's great.
Yeah, at Northwestern University.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting story too about Northwestern, because Northwestern has one of the best radio, TV, and film schools in the country.
Oh,
as you probably know. When I attended Northwestern, I was an English major in secondary ed. I never went in the building for radio, TV, and film. Never even saw the inside of it at all.
Wow.
Which is ironic.
That is ironic, yeah.
Absolutely. So then, Pat, tell us your journey. Tell us, where were you born?
I was born in Hampton, Virginia. Grew up there when I was 16. my family moved to Brooklyn, New York. My dad was a boys club director, and he got a job directing the Bedford Boys Club on Kosciuszko and Nostrand in Brooklyn. And so I went to high school, finished high school at Thomas Jefferson in East New York.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then went on to Northwestern. I was there for 4 years. And then I moved to New Orleans. That was where I got my first job teaching. And while I was there, taking some graduate courses, I met somebody who was coordinating hostesses for the NATRA convention. I'm sure some of you will remember NATRA. I'm sure that Vi and G. Keith will. National Association of Television and Radio Announcers. It was the Black DJs organization.
Ah, nice. Okay.
Yeah, and so I was a hostess at this convention, and they had Frankie Crocker and J.J. Jeffries and Butterball and all the top jocks from across the country. And after that weekend, I was like, if these are the top jocks, I bet I could do that too. And so I enrolled in a broadcasting school for 6 months and got really lucky, got a part-time job, which led to a full-time job. And I took a sabbatical leave from teaching 47 years ago.
Wow. Beautiful. All right. And you know what? G. Keith, I understand that Chi-Town is your spot. So tell me about your journey.
Well, okay. I started out as a kid. I was born in Chicago. I was conceived in New Orleans, but I was born in Chicago. And so I went to the Marine Corps, and when I got out of the Marine Corps, I got a scholarship to Fordham University here in New York. And so I stayed. And then eventually I went back to Chicago to start WGCI Radio. Frankie and we were the team that put that together. And then I got fired, and then I came back to New York. So I left. So Chicago, prior to being 17, was a very nice city. I had a nice life. We lived in what was called the urban center of Chicago, and I was lucky to get out in order to be able to come to New York and learn broadcasting, something I'd always wanted to do, even when I was a kid.
Nice. And Vi, tell me about you, but also importantly, I know before Mama Foundation, right? We also had you talking about your journey in terms of discovering your roots. So I want to hear about So I want to hear about all of that. So tell me. Go ahead.
Okay, so born into the block of 126th Street, family been on this block for almost 100 years. So, and I'm still on this block. So here we are. And so if you want to talk about this family roots, I wanted to figure out, I thought the stories in our family were always about being Native American, and we figured that we wanted to figure out, what tribe we came from and where we came from. As it turned out, through DNA, we discovered that there was 0 Native American blood, and there was this European blood that we had no idea existed. So that DNA test took me to Poplar Bluff, Missouri, with a white cattle rancher. His name was Marion West. My grandmother's name was Anna West, and that was our connection through DNA. And it turned out to be a journey in American history, telling the stories about coming from Virginia and how Black folks stayed in Virginia, but the white folks went west and they settled in Kentucky and Tennessee and Arizona. So this American story became something of interest from the New York Times in 60 Minutes. And so that story was told. Wow. And it seems like, I know we do all this stuff with Henry Louis Gates, but that seems like such a long time ago that this DNA were matching people up that didn't know they belonged together.
So true. So very true. And you know what, Pat? Certainly Hampton Roads off of Route 13. I remember it well. Hanging out up in Chincoteague and Assateague.
That's right, with the little horses.
You guys, exactly. Tell me about your life growing up there. What do you remember?
Growing up in Hampton was a very cool thing. I mean, I grew up in a segregated town, went to all segregated schools. We integrated the new high school the year before I moved to New York. I didn't know anybody white until I was in 10th grade. And it was a wonderful upbringing. I mean, we had the greatest education you could ever have. I mean, you know, it was an interesting thing. I mean, we had our own little society. And it was great. I mean, everybody I knew in any kind of position of authority looked like me. The doctors, the lawyers at church, everywhere. You know, we grew up. I mean, it was a real thing with white and colored water fountains, and we had to sit in the balcony in the movie theater. I remember asking my mother once why we had to sit in the balcony, and she said it's because some people think they're better than us. They're wrong, but that's what some people think. And I remember that very clearly. But as I said, wonderful upbringing. I got an incredible education. I was a great student, always really liked to read. But I think one of the things that helped lead me to radio was my dad, who was a big music lover. He had thousands of albums. He had everything from, classical music to John Coltrane and Billie Holiday. He bought the first Beatles record that came in our house. He was in Germany in the service, so my dad had albums of German drinking songs, which we knew all the words to. Didn't know what we were singing. He had all of the Broadway soundtracks. I know the words to almost every song from, On a Clear Day, Golden Boy, West Side Story, all that stuff. That music was in my head my whole life. And, it has really dictated my love of music, and particularly my love of jazz, because that's what he played the most. So those years were really important in terms of my music education that I got at home, and the music education I got at school also, because we had that then.
Nice. And I definitely have to, let's say that in terms of when we talk about music, and G. Keith, you will appreciate this. So certainly we know about Louisiana, right? New Orleans, especially, but then definitely then Chicago, South Side, between blues and also the early stages of jazz. What do you remember about that?
Well, I remember growing up, and my mother used to play blues music. There was a guy called something the Blues Man, and she'd be ironing and she'd be playing the blues. And so I grew up listening to the blues, and then jazz. I remember the early days of one of the jazz stations, and there was a guy named Daddy O'Daly. He was the famous guy. And then I got into WVON with Herb Kent, the Cool Gent, and all those guys. And my days that I remember, my mom used to buy World Book encyclopedias every other year.
Oh yes.
And I would sit on the floor in front of the television, and I'd thumb through the encyclopedias, and I'd listen to this guy on the TV say WLS Chicago. And I didn't know it was a job. I just used to imitate the guy, and so I remember being in like third grade, and the nun stood all the students up against the wall and went down the line, asked each of us what did we want to become, and I said I wanted to become a radio announcer. And so I had forgotten all about that. And recently, when we had our what do you call it when folks reunion? We had our reunion. One of my classmates reminded me that I had said back in 5th grade that I wanted to be a radio announcer, and I said, wow, I have actually become what I said I wanted to be. So that's kind of how I grew up in Chicago. Went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy. They were grooming me to be a priest. Then a nun caught me hugging and on one of my classmates.
So it was a co-ed school, huh?
Yes, it was a co-ed grammar school. And so a nun comes around the corner and she says, she called me by my first name, which I won't reveal here. she said, "Don't you let them make you anything you really don't want to become." So that's when I realized, yeah, I do like this female male. So that's why I am not Father G. Keith now.
What can I ask, Keith? Do you remember? WSDM smack dab in the middle?
Oh,
when they had an all-female staff. One of the girls was Penny Lane, and they had Strawberry Fields, and they had Yvonne Daniels with her awesome self.
That's right. I remember that.
Was a great. When I was in college, that station was happening. I remember that.
Oh wow!
I used to listen to them.
Yeah, they were all females.
Well, back up. So where was that particular station broadcasting from?
Chicago. It was in a Chicago station.
WSDM.
Yeah, and it was right in the middle of the dial, and so they called it WSDM, and they had all these girls named after the Beatles songs. Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, and then of course Yvonne Daniels, Billy Daniels' daughter. I want to say.
I didn't know she was Billy Daniels' daughter.
She was related to Billy Daniels. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Yvonne Daniels. She was very, very popular.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So now, Vi, you did not want to become Sister Vi, or did you? But having said that, tell me about you in terms of what drew you to radio, especially radio announcing. Yep.
Unlike Keith, I didn't know that I wanted to be a radio personality. I thought I wanted to be in the retail business with fashion and buying and merchandising and cosmetics and beauty and stuff like that. And then, like Pat, someone suggested I go to broadcast school. I went to broadcast school to do fashion and beauty because I thought that was missing in the Black community for Black women. I wanted to talk to Black women, and I then I took that tape to Frankie Crocker, and that's when he hired me based on that tape about women and fashion and beauty. But growing up here in Harlem, our radio station was WLIB AM, and they of course had Eddie O.J.
Oh yes, right.
Big man, orange juice. And he'd be all over town, and he'd be up in the Bronx, and the Bronx I forget the name of the place that he would have events all the time. And then of course there was Hal Jackson, but most importantly, my mother liked Joe Bostic. Wow. Joe Bostic was the gospel man all day on Saturday and Sunday on the weekends, and so we listened to gospel like crazy. And of course the Apollo Theater was right down the street. So on Saturdays, they would have, children's hour. So your mother could drop you off and you could see James Brown, and you can see all the greats of that time. And so the music was always such a big part of Harlem. People used to sing, people who were coming from the South used to sing under the street lights, and they would be singing doo-wops in the hallway so they could get the echo. So everything for me was always surrounded by the element of music. And then, of course, there was WWRL, where those cats was rapping in the very early days. Gary Bird and all those.
Those guys at WWRL, they were like the Temptations of radio.
Really? Tell me about that in terms of the harmonies. What? Tell me.
Well, no, and their style, the way they dressed, and the things that
stars.
They were stars on the radio. I mean, they were from Jerry Bledsoe to Hank Spann to Al G, Bobby J. All those guys, and they were like they wore suits and ties and drove Cadillacs, and they were stars.
So tell us all about the sojourn from AM to FM, because that's what really set it off.
Yes.
Well, when I started,
go ahead. Jiggy, go ahead. Continue.
Okay, when I met Frankie Crocker, it was WLIB FM, and it had been jazz with Ed. Forget Ed's last name. The guy who had actually ran the the FM because it was a jazz station. But then when they hired Frankie, they took a lot of that music off, and Frankie put a lot of his stuff in. And I remember the day when it was getting ready to be converted to WBLS. Frankie said, "Hey man, let's go downtown." So we jump in his Rolls. We get downtown. we get downtown to a recording studio, and in the middle of the recording studio, there were these two huge speakers on towers. And Frankie said, "Listen to this," and he told the guy, "Go ahead, hit it." And when the guy hit it, it went WBLS. It ping pong from speaker to speaker. No one had ever heard that before.
Yes.
And so then he took that back, and a few days later it became WBLS as opposed to WLIB FM. And we used to always say, and Vi remembers this, I'm sure, we used to always say, and don't forget to put an FM radio in your car, because everybody had AM radio.
That's right.
And FM was really elevator music for a lot of stations. But when we turned it to WBLS, we were in the forefront of FM radio, because we used to remind people, don't forget to put an FM radio in your car.
Wow.
You know,
That's right.
The thing that stands out to me the most about WBLS was the fact that Frankie bookended himself by Vi and Lamar Renee. And I just thought that was just the coolest thing ever, you know, because you would get to hear, it was Kenny in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And Spiderweb was on in the morning with the color of the day. And then Vi would come on smooth as silk. Then Frankie would do his little thing in Afternoon Drive. And, you know, as soon as he played the King Pleasure, then here comes Lamar Renee.
Yes.
I mean, it was, these women just captivated me. I mean, you know, I wasn't, I think the first woman I heard on the air was when I was in college, when they had those girls on WSDM. But that was like kind of gimmicky. These were real. This was a real radio station with a real program and longevity. These people stayed there. And Vi, you know, you really, and I wasn't even thinking about being in radio. I just thought you were amazing. Just that voice and your presence. And you were always talking about something that made sense. You know, not just a lot of gobbledygook. Vi was about business. Vi was like the magazine, Unique New York, all this stuff, man. You know, you were my idol from way, way back.
Wow.
I just want to trip back just a little bit and remind G. Keith of probably the most fun days that we had when it was still WLIB FM. And that's the introduction of the total Black experience in sound.
Yes.
And we had vinyl. Keith, we had vinyl on the floor. And it was gospel, jazz, R&B, and Latin, a different shade of Black. And we were able to go and program our own music. And if we wanted to listen to Billie Holiday, or if we want to listen to Sarah Vaughan, or if we want to listen to Santana, whoever, we could go in that category and deliver a total Black experience and sound. And to me, that was great radio. And you could put your personality inside the music that you selected for that day. And WBLS became BLS when Percy Sutton purchased the radio station. We always, you know, get tripped up on the actual dates of when that happened and when it moved downtown. But that station was far on the way with the total Black experience and sound. And I just want to say this last thing. If you look at the Summer of Soul documentary, and you see who was featured in that documentary, those were the people who were featured on the total Black experience and sound. That's when you had Nina Simone, and that's when you had Shirley Caesar, you know, all back to back in one radio broadcast. It was insanely fabulous, a great celebration. I'm shut up now.
Let me just say this about something that Vi said. After a while, that freedom to play whatever we wanted changed. It stopped.
Yeah.
Frankie would after we left the station, Frankie would take me to his house, and we would program all the music for the whole week. We had a sheet, and he would program every song on this sheet, and then he'd put the sheet up on the wall in the studio.
Wow.
So now we couldn't dig into the boxes to play the stuff. Now we had to play according to what he had programmed on the wall.
Got it.
And so that took a little freedom away. And but you know, we were still the station that 3rd Avenue, Madison Avenue, 5th Avenue, all the heretofore, well, prior to WBLS, the white business owners and stores downtown didn't listen to black radio. But when BLS came along, all along those avenues, in the boutique stores, everywhere, BLS was the station.
Yeah, it was everywhere. I mean, you could just walk down the street and people had, you know, boom boxes, and you hear it in every car. The cabs were all playing BLS, and that was the one that was the world's best looking sound.
Yes.
Stereo in
you
black.
Know, what Frankie brought really was a professionalism, and it was colorless in a lot of ways, because no one sounded like, you know, you couldn't just listen to Vi or any of those guys and say, oh, those are black people. Those were just sophisticated, elegant people. And he was really into that presentation. That format also just affected so many other places. I remember when I started in New Orleans at WYLD-FM, Anthony Wilson was the program director, the guy who gave me my first job on the radio, and he was a Frankie Crocker devotee. Okay, he was doing the 360-degree total black experience there as well, and the freedom was unbelievable. We haven't seen anything like that in radio since that time.
Wow. You know, if I may, people used to come from Europe and get a hotel room, and at the time they had, you know, we had the reel-to-reel tape recorders, and they would set up a tape recorder and tape the format of WBLS and take it back to Europe to their stations, as well as other cities in the United States would try to emulate the WBLS format, and that went on for a long time.
So one of the things that you mentioned, Pat, in terms of growing up there in Hampton Roads and whatnot, in terms of Jim Crow, it was prevalent, it was there. So now when we talk about radio, we also had a Jim Crow system with radio. Now, certainly I do know that as a listener of music, I did not care. I went for the sound. So if you had Blue Eyed Soul, I'd want to hear it. You know, from Michael McDonald to Steely Dan, you know, with Asia, all that stuff I'd like to hear. So were there certain things that, let's say, okay, this is a quote-unquote black station, but I'm going to play this because I like the sound?
Well, that was what Frankie Crocker did. He was the first person to play Betty Davis Eyes. And I mean, he broke some of the biggest white records ever. And like I said, it was really it was colorblind. It was fearless programming also. You know, I know for a lot of us, depending on your whole orientation, you know, when I was at school at Northwestern, that was where I learned rock music, Jimi Hendrix and Blind Faith and all of these other people. So a lot of us have been exposed to a lot of different types of music. And I think that what Frankie did was to bring in, he increased that audience so much. It wasn't a black radio station. It was a quality radio station that attracted people who really like music and like variety. That format I would call like radio for the rest of us who don't want to hear just this. You look at how segmented radio is now. I mean, a lot of people listening to satellite radio, and I mean, it is so niche. You know, I have a station that only plays it if you're it was made in the 30s. This station only if it was. I mean, it's so narrow. When if you love music, you want to hear some of all of that. Like I said, you know, the gospel with the jazz, with the R&B, with the pop, with the rock, all of it.
So, NightWatchman, I understand that you did a little bit of DJing yourself there in college. Now, did you have a particular format that you were following?
Well, yeah. whatever I wanted to play because it was a college station. But it speaks to exactly what Pat is talking about, because the joy of it was being able to just express yourself playing the music that you loved, and having the freedom to do that. And certainly what WBLS did was break down the barriers and say we don't put music in boxes. There's only two categories. There's good music and bad music. And if you like the good music category, there's a wide range you can go to. And so I think we were all profoundly moved, changed, and affected by the WBLS experience when it hit New York, because I was a WLIB devotee, used to listen to Eddie OJ in the morning as a youngster. And then BLS came, and it was LIBFM, and then it was BLS, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God. And as you were saying, Pat, we could listen all day long because it was Ken, and then it was Vi, and then it was Frankie, and then it was Lamar, and then Vaughn Harper after that, And so there was really no reason. There was no reason to ever turn the radio off, because alongside of all that, you got all the music that we loved. And then we had these guides. You guys were, you guys guided us through the music, and you let us know what was going on, and time and temperature and weather and all that. But you did it in a way that there was such style and elegance, and it was about Black elegance and elevating the Black experience and sound at a level that it really was just so well done that it just overtook the city. And I think we are all forever changed and forever grateful for that experience.
Absolutely.
Yes. It was a collective healing. It was when we came together. If the Summer of Soul brought people together with that sound of music and that total Black experience, the radio translated that into communities from Queens and Bronx and Brooklyn, wherever you lived in New Jersey. It brought us in one place, and we were really proud to have our finger on the pulse of what was happening, what's going on. We were here to tell you what was the next good or best thing wherever it was, and that was a lot of fun.
We were the Pied Pipers. I think it was either New York Magazine or New Yorker Magazine did an article on me and Frankie during the time that people were, I don't know if you remember, but on the weekends, people would gather around Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. And folks, it was a very colorful time. People wore costumes and all sorts of things. So the New Yorker magazine or the New York magazine did an article calling Frankie and I the Pied Pipers of radio, because we told people where to go, where to shop, where the next party was, and all that. So during that time of that period of radio, there was not much distraction. It was either you had your favorite radio station, one or two radio stations, you had three stations, three TV stations, and that was it. And when you came home from work or came home from school, you would go to one of those things, and that was your source of information. And that was the time when I think BLS really flourished, because we had a multitude of different ethnic people listening to the station and going wherever we told them to go.
Yeah. And and that then became, the I'm Black and I'm Proud. And it was emerging. It was an emerging of a generation. It was an emerging of coming out of the civil rights movement. People were beginning to be hired. Women were on the radio. There was something that was collectively happening that you could experience. And Pat, you mentioned Unique New York. And that's, if you had New York Magazine and New Yorker Magazine, then why didn't we have something where we could talk about Black people, places, and lifestyle, where to go, what to do, and what's happening, and so that everybody could be inspired and stimulated and encouraged to keep on. So between the radio station and the magazine and the emerging community, it all came together in one clock. And there was some good and there was some not so good things. I mean, there were some things that got knocked out by evolution. Like if we look back over the radio experience, I would say that when we didn't have gospel anymore, that sort of took no presence of gospel anymore. And then when we began to filter in other kinds of music, it sort of diminished some of the music that was there. And there was replacement things that happened with evolution. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think that makes any sense.
It does. I think that that's a very important point. But I mean, we've seen that happen with radio programming in general. I mean, it's just become more and more diluted, you know, certainly the creative part of it. But one other thing I wanted to say about Frankie was I never saw anybody who could break a record like this man, because he would take the record and he would play it 10 times in a row, talking smack over the whole thing. I mean, you could, if the new record came out, I'll never forget when Babyface came out with Whip Appeal. We counted. Frankie played that song 11 times in a row.
Wow.
He broke it till it was really broke. I mean, you know, but it was an interesting phenomenon. I mean, he really drove a lot of what happened in the business. He was really, what you guys did, G. Keith, was pretty remarkable.
Thank you, Pat. Let me give you a little trivia, Frankie trivia.
Go ahead.
What was the name of that? Frankie's intro record was called.
It's an organ piece.
Was it Jack McDuff? Well, anyway, the reason why that 8-minute long record used to open Frankie's show is because Frankie used to be late. Starting his show at 4:00. So someone got the idea, well, hey, let's put this record on and give him 8 minutes to get himself together once, you know, and so that's how that began.
Wow.
Frankie was really, you know, I remember when my first job at BLS was as I would fill in for Frankie, you know, and that was not easy for me to get that job because I had been at WRVR. WRVR famously changed format to country and Western.
I think I remember that. Yeah,
that was
story because I was on the air. That was when Viacom bought them. I don't think it was before they became Viacom, I think, but they came in and bought the station, and they had a big meeting, and I was doing middays, and the meeting was at 10 o'clock in the morning. They went to the meeting. When they came out of the meeting, everybody came into the studio and said, "We're going country at noon." I thought they were joking. I thought they were kidding. They started taking all of the records out of the studio. They told me, program the last hour, don't say anything. And they started bringing in the carts with the country music on it. And I'll never forget it. The last song I played was Charlie Mingus, Goodbye Pork Pie Hat.
Yeah.
And at the top of the hour, they hit with Are You Ready for the Country from Waylon Jennings.
Wow.
And the answer was no.
Wow.
You know?
I worked at RVR.
But anyway, so when I started looking for a job, I did go, I tried BLS. I sent Frankie my tape several times. Finally, he called me. They had somebody call me, and I came in there and sat around like while he was doing his show. He liked to have people sitting around, and there was all these girls sitting around. And then afterwards, you go downstairs to the Chinese restaurant, and they're sitting there, and I'm like, when is this guy going to interview me? And then after an hour or so in the restaurant, he says, "You'll start next week." Because he was the Johnny Carson of radio, that was a good part-time job because he never was there. He was always taking off.
I worked at RVR before you did, and I got fired from RVR, which got me over to 92 KTU, Disco 92. But I want to say about Frankie. When I went to get my, a guy named Rocky G sent me to get my job over at Frankie's studio over at WLIB-FM. So I walk in, and I had this little cassette tape that I had with me that I used to be at WHBI, where I paid a guy $20 every Tuesday morning to be on the air at 5:15 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. So I took this little tape with me, and I let Frankie listen to it in the studio, and he started laughing. And then he says, "You want to be in radio, huh, kid?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I tell you what, you're going to be my music librarian, and whenever I take off, you're going to sit in for me." And I didn't know anything about big time radio, but what I did learn was Frankie, he didn't like for me to laugh on the radio and all that stuff, but I used to laugh anyway. But what I'm getting ready to say is that when I first sat down to work in Frankie's chair, he used to have us play this thing about, if Frankie Crocker isn't on your radio isn't
really on. That's right.
That used to irk me because I'm sitting there, Frankie, and I would have to play this thing saying that if he wasn't there, the radio wasn't really on. So that's how I started working as Frankie's fill-in when I first started. So Pat, you and I both have similar experiences with RVR and BLS.
Well, wait. Let me take you. I work for WRVR too.
Wow.
Okay.
All alums. I love this.
All alums. Yeah, and that was Van J.
Van J.
Was the program director, and that was another good time. That library at WRVR, you can walk back in there and pull your records for what you want to play that night.
Whatever you felt like.
Whatever you felt like. And you would set the mood for radio.
Rainy day, rainy music.
Oh my God. And speaking of sitting in for Frankie, because you, G. Keith, mentioned that sometimes, especially when it was at WLIB FM, if I was on from 12 to 4 and he was coming in at 4 before the 8-minute record, he may not get in there until 6. So you would be on the radio from 12 until 6. So you were really filling in for Frankie Crocker until he got there. And those are the days. Those are the days. He had many names. Like those are the days when he was
Black Satin.
Black Satin. And Hollywood, those
Hollywood, that's right.
And the Chief Rocker.
The Chief Rocker, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh man. So
Pat, I want to ask you a little bit about CD 101.9 and that experience.
Oh yes.
Oh,
yes.
that was a great experience. I remember, I was one of those New York people who would drive. I lived uptown in Harlem where it wasn't real expensive to put your car in the garage. So, and because I was doing mornings, I would just drive into work. But I was driving home and I was listening to WPIX. I turned it on, and they were playing all of this jazz. They were playing, Grover Washington Jr. and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, listen to them. They're playing because that was the station that would do love songs.
Wow.
But love songs.
Nice.
So y'all might remember that. But I got home. I turned on the radio again. I said, they are still playing that music. And they weren't saying anything, as they often do when they make a format change, just run down the music. Yeah. And then when I realized what they were doing, I was like, it immediately became my favorite station. And Barry Mayo called up Wendy Leeds and told her, if you're going to do that, you really should hire Pat Prescott. And I was at BLS at the time. And she called me. And this was also a really fun experience because in the beginning there, we also played whatever we wanted. And it was just such a sense of freedom to be able to do that. It was something so unique, that we really hadn't heard on the radio before. But another format which they did a good job of watering down and ruining. Ultimately.
Well, you know what, Pat? I definitely have to say that my first exposure, because my parents, the different generation, so they got into straight ahead jazz, from Miles to John Coltrane. But my exposure was smooth jazz. And I'm talking about Al Jarreau. I'm talking about Michael Franks. And I said, oh, I like this. This is kind of cool. So I definitely missed the format of what's that, smooth jazz CD 101, and I hated the folks who were like getting on it like, oh, this ain't real jazz. I'm not talking about no daggone Kenny G. I'm talking about some good easy listening
Yeah.
jazz. You know.
Well, you know, somebody alluded to this earlier. I think that the sonic quality of music is what really matters the most. You can play whatever you want as long as it works together. And for me, it's got to have melody or rhythm or both, and some and great performances by the musicians. And I think you can play anything. I mean, Frankie certainly proved it. All of us have had the opportunity in our careers to show that at some point in time. That we can, you know, DJs used to be the tastemakers. We were the ones who introduced people to new music, told you about who these people were, made them real to you, told the stories behind them about who they are. And, you know, it'd be nice to see some of that come back. I'm getting to do that now at WBGO. And I got to tell you, it is just a thrill to be able to do that again.
Beautiful.
You know, I have a memory, and G-Keep, you can see if this sparks any feelings about. Frankie Crocker used to do the Apollo Theater, and and if you were one of the first Apollo theaters, he included the Total Black Experience. I remember Jimmy Smith was God,
yes.
You know, all of those jazz players were on. Do you remember that, G-Keep?
I don't remember
the Apollo.
No, the Apollo I remember because I'm still, you know, the announcer for the galas and stuff for the Apollo. But I don't remember. What I remember was the day that Al Green was at the Apollo, and Frankie and I were standing in the back of the house, and Frankie looked up and said, "Boy, that guy sure dresses funny." He had on a window pane suit with high water pants, and but he was singing, and that's the only time I remember being in the Apollo with Frankie.
Right.
Yeah. Man, oh man. So you telling me that Al Green did not have a fashion sense? Is that it?
He didn't need one. He was Al Green.
He had that voice.
He was country as all get out, but he had the voice, and he was dating this woman by the name of Laura Lee. Laura Lee was a singer as well, and she had a Rolls Royce, and she had a big fur coat and stuff. She looked like she was wealthy, and that was his lady. But he was country.
Yeah, he was.
When you think about that time period, it always reminds me of the genius of all of those people who came out of those compositions, those lyrics, that time period when they could write, they could compose, they could play. They were really our true geniuses who need that level of celebration. When you think about all of them, whether it was jazz or gospel or R&B, and you mentioned Al Green, that voice, and Otis Redding, and you know the Commodores. Think about all of those people who made music and created a landscape of blackness through lyrics and compositions. Unbelievable.
That's true. But you know what, Curtis? I'm sorry. I don't know how much time we have left, but I really hope that we get a chance for Vi to talk a little bit about Mama I Want to Sing. You know, how she took her radio career and her sister's career and really turned it into one of the most amazing productions that I have ever seen. It is about to celebrate its 40th anniversary. I can't believe that, Vi.
Yeah, listen, and all of us, we're on this radio station, and all of us was in Mama I Want to Sing. Pat Prescott, Alexander, all of our radio sisters and brothers played in Mama I Want to Sing. And I love that. And I have a dream that you, Pat, and G-Keep will come back when we celebrate the 40th anniversary and go back up on that stage and we recreate that again.
I wouldn't miss it. That. I wouldn't think of missing that.
Oh.
Right. And we will have you back on the show. What is the 40th anniversary? Is it in February?
Yes. And we're celebrating Black music, Black theater, Black history, Black culture, but Black voices. The sound of the human voice and what it can do.
How surprised were you, Vi? How surprised were you at how that was received and how that little thing grew? I used to call it the miracle on Fifth Avenue because it was just the most. I mean, the buses lined up for blocks and blocks. Vi worked us like runaways. We were doing 10 shows a week in 4 days. Okay? We were eating breakfast and lunch and dinner in the theater. But what a great time it was.
Yes,
oh,
what a great time it was.
Well, hold it, please. Vi, start with the genesis in terms of the how that came from your head into an actual production. Tell me about Mama I Want to Sing and also the Mama Foundation.
Well, you know, Curtis, it really started when I graduated from college and my sister took me to Europe because Doris Troy sang the song Just One Look. That's all it took. And she was the voice behind the Beatles, Billy Preston, and many of the songs. She was the first person signed to the Apple label with John Lennon and all of that. So while we were on tour, moving from London to Paris to Amsterdam and all of the red carpet, she would tell me the story of my father and our block here on 126th Street and all the stories about the church. And that was the time I'm the youngest, she was the oldest. So she was giving me the family history on this tour throughout Europe. And I kept that in my mind. And when I mixed the fact that on this block, on the corner was the radio station, the Apollo was down the street, and Sylvia's was around the corner. We kind of put this little pocket of time and music, and the radio station had a big part of it. So when the radio station changed, we could add the format of a total Black experience and sound on stage. So there's a radio station, WBHW, that's Vy Higgensen Wydro.
Very good.
So we got to play the music that I really wanted to hear. So we took gospel. We told the story, the American legacy of Black music, starting in the church and how it got on radio and then on global stages. Yes. So we told that story, and we let none of the parts of our Black community that people like to promote, the violence, the crime, the rapes, and all the rest of it, that wasn't part of that experience. And people saw themselves on the stage, and they heard their favorite radio personalities, and they just kept coming back. And you know what's so ironic? Somebody said, how come you didn't stay at that station? We were there for 8 years, 10 performances a week. And one of our ex-mayors came around the corner and said, get them niggas off Fifth Avenue. And that's how we got closed down.
exactly.
Yes? And we had a lease in our hand, and that's it. And so it's ironic that after 40 years, we're going back to the place they threw us out of.
Congrats.
Come on, Black history. Come on, Black legacy. Come on.
Yeah, but it was, I tell you, and I think it was the beginning of that whole trend toward those Black plays that, Tyler Perry and all those guys did. Mama was really in the vanguard of all of that. And look at how popular that genre has become. You had a lot to do with that too, Vi.
Well,
Nice.
Thank you for that recognition. And, it ushered in this phase of African American theater. We identified the way BLS identified the audience, the way Summer of Soul identified the audience. Mama I Want to Sing identified the audience, not only in New York. They said, oh, it's just a New York thing because you got a lot of Black people in New York. Well, they went to Philadelphia and Washington and Detroit and New Orleans and Chicago and then LA. They said, oh, it never work on the West Coast. But,
everywhere.
That audience was identified and that audience was developed, and it needed to have more. And that's when the door was open to others.
I see this underlying theme, which is just when the music is good, people respond to it. And breaking out of the boxes and conventions that we were put in. And it's so great to see you, Vi, what you've done over the years. And when the first time we interviewed you, one of the things I realized is like you had everything within like a 3-block radius. And at that point in time, she got her hot sauce into Whole Foods, which was still within that 3-block
radius. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I never thought of it like that. Oh my God.
You know what, Curtis? One other thing too about G. Keith.
Mm-hmm.
G. Keith was the first person that made me realize that voiceover work was a job, that it was something to do. This guy, and I'd love to hear a little bit about how you really got into that and kept it going, and he continued to do that. I still hear your voice all over the place. You must have a good agent.
G. Keith is in that 3-block radius, by the
way. Go ahead, G. Keith. Tell us.
Well, I was very fortunate. I was at BLS at the time, and I got this phone call from Black Beauty, because I was registered with Black Beauty Agency. That was a talent agency at the time that had Richard Roundtree and Diane Carroll and so they called me out of the clear blue and said, "Hey, we've got this voiceover. Would you like to do it?" And it was for Dark and Lovely. I had never done a voiceover before, but I said, "Oh, okay." So I went and I did it, and Frankie ended up playing it on BLS because they had bought time on BLS. And I said, "Wow, this is pretty cool." And I got some royalty checks from it. So I started pursuing voiceovers through this agency called Cunningham at the time.
Okay.
Oh yes, yeah.
And so now I CESD, but I started pursuing voiceovers, and one thing just led to another, Pat, and one thing led to another, and I started doing. Well, there was only about 5 Black guys in the whole country doing voiceovers at the time. Roscoe Mercer, who was called Roscoe on the radio.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple of other people out in Hollywood. Oh, and Adolph Caesar. So it was about 5.
Yeah.
In fact, the not the Wall Street Journal, but one of those TV stations did a documentary on the 5 of us. But anyway, to make a long story short, I just kept pursuing voiceovers, and the next thing I knew, my agent took me out of the Black category and put me in general market. So I started doing market commercials, and one thing just led to another. And I used to remember whenever there was an event and I saw Pat Prescott somewhere at an event, Pat would always, and this was like a running joke with us, Pat would always yell down the hall, "G. Keith, how do I get into voiceovers? G. Keith."
Guess that worked out, huh?
It was always a running joke with us. And then eventually Pat got in, and she was, like you said earlier, Bob, she was all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
And thanks for your help and encouragement, though. Really meant a lot.
You're quite welcome. And if I may be my own horn, I'll say this, that I've done over 1,000 national radio and TV commercials in my career.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
Beautiful. Yes, indeed. So NightWatchman.
Yeah, we're in wrap-up mode, but before we wrap up, G. Keith, can you tell us a little bit about Harlem America?
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you. Harlem America is the total Black experience in entertainment, empowerment, and health and wellness. A little nod Crocker there with the total Black experience. And what we do is we're connecting Harlem with the Harlems of the world. And so wherever there's a large community of Black people around the country, wherever they are, we're talking to them. We provide our radio podcasts, and we have our TV show, our TV channels. I've got 10 TV channels, 10 on demand, 10 live, and 10 audio channels. And so when we do our radio shows, we go across 2 channels. We go across Voice America and Harlem America. Now, what we do is we sell packages of 13-week packages to business people who may want to have their own radio show but don't know how to produce it. We produce it for them. We take care of the marketing. We give them a dedicated audio engineer who takes them in and out of commercials. We also handle the intro and outro music for them. We have a library that they can go through, and we do the opening and closing voiceovers for them if they desire. So that's what we do with Harlem American Digital Network, and we're covering all the major events in Harlem. We just did the African American Day Parade. We do Coffee Week, and some of the other events, and that's what we are all about. Harlem.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Vi, tell us about you in terms of if folks want to actually learn about, of course, the anniversary. Or any upcoming events that the Mama Foundation, they can go to the website, or you do tell.
Yes, mamafoundation.org.
Okay.
We want to make sure that young people are aware of the music of our ancestors. So we're inviting young people in our program, which is offered for free. We teach breathing, harmony, pitch, and control, a repertoire of music, and then they perform. So we've had thousands of young people go through our program. The doors are still open. And so if they're young people between the ages of 10 and 19 years old, they're welcome to be part of the Mama Foundation Choir. Join the choir because the music increases your IQ. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. And Pat, certainly we do know whatnot that, you know, the classic line from The Godfather 3, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. So you continued. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I will continue to serve as a host on the Dave Koz and Friends cruise. We'll be headed to the Mediterranean in 2023.
Nice.
I'm also doing the Capital Jazz Super Cruise, the Warren Hill Cancun Jazz Festival, the Jadar Entertainment Island Escape is also coming up. But see, I didn't have time to work. I got too much other stuff to do like that. But please listen to my show, Favorite Things, with Pat Prescott on WBGO. You can hear it from noon to 2 p.m. Monday through Friday, either on the WBGO app or at WBGO.org. And they also have archive shows too, so you can hear past shows. I really would love for you to check it out. I'm having so much fun doing that.
Definitely, definitely. Night Watchman,
and we're having so much fun here. Thank you so much. Say what you got to say, brother.
No, we don't want to end. We don't want to end.
We don't want to end, but as you know, we got a time slot we got to fill. So you've been listening to the radio legends of New York City right here on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. This is Soul Lounge Primetime. You can find us 7 p.m. on Monday nights on WHCR, and you can find us at 8 p.m. streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. Like, subscribe, and always come back and check us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Love you guys. Yes.
Love you too.
All right.